Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into what is honestly a fascinating geographic and historical paradox. If you look at Denmark on a map today, well, it looks pretty small. But for centuries, this nation controlled vital sea routes, ruled a massive kingdom, shaped the entire North Atlantic, and ultimately built one of the world's most stable and prosperous welfare states. So we're going to explore exactly how a country with such a modest physical footprint became, and literally remains, an absolute global powerhouse. Right off the bat, here is the core paradox we're looking at. On the one hand, Denmark is this remarkably compact landmass, just over 43,000 square kilometers. But on the other hand, it casts this massive global footprint. We're talking about a historic maritime kingdom, a literal gateway between Scandinavia and Europe, a pioneer of the modern welfare state, and a global leader in shipping and green energy. So, how does a tiny, remarkably flat nation command that much power? Here is our roadmap for today. 1. Geography and strategic coasts. 2. A history of influence. 3. The welfare state model. 4. An agile modern economy. And 5. Culture and challenges. Let's jump straight into Section 1, Geography and strategic coasts. The gateway between seas. To really understand Denmark's influence, you absolutely have to start with its sheer fragmentation. Denmark proper is made up of the Jutland Peninsula, which stretches up from Germany, and an archipelago of 406 islands. And it is incredibly flat. I mean, its highest point is Melohai, sitting at a mere 170 meters above sea level. It's basically a hill. But the crucial metric here, it's their 7,300 kilometers of coastline. This flat, island-rich geography naturally turned Denmark into a nation of sailors, giving it strategic control over the vital bottleneck shipping routes right between the North Sea and the Baltic Sea. But Denmark doesn't just accept being a disconnected island geography. They literally engineered their way out of it. We're talking massive infrastructure projects, like the Øresund Bridge tunnel that links Zealand over to Sweden, along with the Great and Little Belt bridges. These incredible feats of engineering have transformed what was a fragmented archipelago into a highly connected, urbanized transit hub. Moving on to Section 2, a history of influence. From Vikings to a constitutional monarchy. Okay, let's rewind a bit, because those vital sea routes made Denmark incredibly wealthy and powerful very early on. Back in the Viking Age, Danish seafarers didn't just raid. They established major trade networks and permanent settlements as far away as England, in an area known as the Danelaw. By 965, Harald Bluetooth Christianized the nation, which basically acted as a strategic deterrent against the Holy Roman Empire. This regional dominance hit its peak in 1397 with the Kalmar Union. This united Denmark, Sweden, and Norway, with Denmark acting as the clear senior partner. Fast forward through the centuries to 1849, and the country peacefully transitioned into a constitutional monarchy. So, what happened to that massive empire? Well, the centuries following that Kalmar Union were basically defined by struggle. Sweden seceded in 1523. Then, after the Napoleonic Wars and the disastrous 1814 Treaty of Kiel, Denmark was forced to give up Norway. But the real turning point? That was the devastating 1864 loss of the Schleswig and Holstein duchies to Prussia. This final defeat forced a massive shift in the Danish psyche. Instead of looking outward to conquer, they started looking inward, focusing entirely on neutrality, social cohesion, and developing the land they still had. Actually, wait, it's really vital to note that while they lost their mainland European territory, the broader Danish realm remained huge. They held on to their historical North Atlantic possessions, the Faroe Islands and Greenland. Both of these maintain home rule today, but they still represent a massive, continuing geopolitical footprint for the Kingdom of Denmark. Let's dive into Section 3, the welfare state model, equality and security. Remember that 19th century pivot inward we just talked about? Well, that laid the absolute groundwork for Denmark's famous modern socioeconomic reality. The cornerstone of their labor market is this brilliant concept called flexicurity, and it beautifully balances two totally opposing forces. Employers get incredible flexibility, meaning it's very easy to hire and fire workers, so businesses can adapt instantly to global markets. But the workers, they get security. If you lose your job, the state steps in with incredibly high unemployment compensation. So it's essentially free market capitalism paired with a fiercely protective social safety net. Now, funding that massive safety net, that requires some deep social consensus. Just look at this staggering number, 46%. That was Denmark's overall taxation level as a percentage of GDP back in 2017, one of the highest in the entire OECD, almost half. But in return, the state provides universal health care, completely free university education, and a ton of other social services. It's the ultimate high-trust society, where people are willing to pool their resources for absolute baseline stability. But here's the secret sauce of how this flexicurity actually functions. The Danish workplace isn't micromanaged by government legislation. No, it's regulated by extremely strong trade unions. Check this out. In 2019, trade union density in Denmark was a massive 67%, with 82% of workers covered by collective bargaining. If you compare that to Germany at just 16%, or the US down around 10%, the difference is night and day. This incredibly high level of collective organization is truly the invisible engine driving their economy. All right, Section 4, an agile modern economy, punching above its weight. Historically, Denmark was a heavily agricultural nation, totally relying on all that flat, arable land we mentioned. But today, they have completely transformed into a high-value, knowledge-based economy. Services absolutely dominate right now, making up roughly 75% of their GDP. Manufacturing is sitting at around 15%, and agriculture, even though it's incredibly high-tech and advanced, has dropped to less than 2% of the economy. And the way they thrive is by dominating incredibly specific global niches. You have AP Møller-Mærsk, an absolute titan of global shipping, just perfectly leveraging that long maritime history. In pharmaceuticals, you've got Novo Nordisk, the undisputed world leaders in diabetes care. Over in green tech, Vestas dominates the wind turbine market globally. And in food processing, Arla Foods exports world-class dairy everywhere. For a country of roughly 6 million people, having this roster of global megacorporations is simply mind-blowing. Let's zoom in on that green tech for just a second. See, Denmark completely lacks major natural mineral resources. So, what did they do? They turned that vulnerability into an innovation superpower. By 2015, wind turbines were already providing an astonishing 42.1% of the country's total electricity consumption. They are the original, longtime pioneers of integrating renewable energy into a national grid. Which brings us to our final section, Section 5. Culture, Society, and Challenges. The modern Danish reality. Danish culture places a massive premium on social equality, modesty, and just a really solid work-life balance. And honestly, that's a huge reason why they are consistently topping the World Happiness Reports year after year. It's a very egalitarian society. On a practical, everyday level, this looks like their legendary cycling culture, which is supported by over 12,000 kilometers of dedicated bike lanes. It also shows up in their functional, world-renowned design and architecture, brought to life by absolute icons like Arne Jacobsen and Jorn Utzon, who famously designed the Sydney Opera House. Now get a load of this fascinating detail because it shows exactly how actively the government shapes that society. To discourage car ownership, lower emissions, and promote all that cycling, Denmark imposes a massive 150% registration tax on new private vehicles, and that is on top of a 25% VAT. Cars there are intensely, deliberately expensive. It's a perfect example of strong state policy directly influencing everyday lifestyle choices. But of course, no place is a perfect utopia. It's a modern state managing some really complex issues. For instance, Denmark faces the ongoing task of integrating a growing immigrant population, which was up to about 12% of the demographic in 2016. They also have to constantly fine-tune their highly agile economy just to sustain the sheer massive cost of their welfare state. Politically, they walk a bit of a tightrope, too. They are deeply integrated into the EU, yet they've opted out of the euro to keep the Danish krone. And geopolitically, they have to carefully manage their evolving relationships with the increasingly autonomous territories of Greenland and the Faroe Islands. So, wrapping this all up, the idea of Denmark as merely a small country is basically just a map illusion. Their immense historical and modern influence wasn't built on having vast, endless plains of land. It was built on the strategic mastery of the seas, the meticulous development of robust, high-trust institutions, and an absolutely unshakable social consensus. And that consensus is what allows them to pool their resources and punch way, way above their weight class on the global stage. I'll leave you with this final thought to chew on. We almost always think of geographic limitations as a weakness, right? But looking at Denmark, from engineering those massive, record-breaking bridges to pioneering global wind energy simply because they lacked minerals, to building this incredibly high-trust society after suffering military defeats, it really begs the question, how do a nation's physical limitations actually become the very engine that drives its innovation and resilience?
Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer today. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll see you next time.